Sabrina Lennox, a woman accustomed to the ruthless world of high finance, never suspected that an early return home could unravel the carefully constructed tapestry of her life. It was a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon when she found herself walking through the hushed, marble-floored hallway of their Beverly Hills mansion. An unexpected sound, a vibrant melody in the otherwise silent space, stopped her in her tracks. Laughter. Not just any laughter, but the unrestrained, joyous sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. It was coming from Julian's room. Julian, her 6-year-old son, who had been silently battling Duchenne muscular dystrophy since the tender age of 4. The cruel disease was slowly, relentlessly stealing his mobility, confining him to a wheelchair and a world of limitations. Each labored breath, each failed attempt to move his small legs, was a dagger to Sabrina's heart. Unable to bear the weight of her child's suffering, she had sought refuge in her work, burying herself in endless meetings and multi-billion-dollar deals. It was a futile attempt to numb the agonizing helplessness of a mother who couldn't save her own child. The guilt festered, slowly transforming Sabrina Lennox into the cold, untouchable titan of the financial world, while simultaneously creating a chasm between her and her own son. Driven by an irresistible force, Sabrina crept towards Julian's partially open door. Peeking through the narrow crack, she froze. Kneeling beside Julian was Elliot Hayes, the unassuming janitor she had hired 6 months prior. But it wasn't his mere presence that made Sabrina's blood run cold. It was what he was doing. With extraordinary gentleness, Elliot was supporting Julian's frail legs, guiding him through a series of movements with the precision and knowledge of a seasoned physical therapist. Julian, in turn, was giggling, his eyes sparkling with a joy Sabrina hadn't witnessed in months. Elliot encouraged him with a soft, humming tune, the rhythm of his voice guiding Julian's every move. Those rough, calloused hands that typically wielded mops and cleaning supplies, moved with astonishing skill, precise, tender, and confident, more so than the army of highly paid therapists Sabrina had hired. "Come on, little man," Elliot whispered, his voice laced with encouragement. "Remember what we talked about yesterday. You're a brave warrior." Julian, his face etched with determination, took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength he possessed. Slowly, painstakingly, he lifted his trembling legs a few inches off the ground. His eyes lit up, reflecting a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Elliot smiled and clapped softly. "That's it. You're getting stronger every day." Sabrina stood frozen, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions raging within her. Anger at an employee overstepping his boundaries and daring to interfere with her son's medical treatment. Confusion at witnessing her child's sudden progress in a matter of minutes. Heartbreak as she realized the person who could coax laughter from Julian wasn't her. And perhaps, deep down, a flicker of jealousy, the kind she didn't dare acknowledge even to herself. But there was something else, something far more unsettling. Elliot was speaking to Julian using precise medical terminology, referencing specific muscle groups, tension points, and extension techniques with an ease that sent shivers down Sabrina's spine. How could a simple janitor possess such a profound understanding of the human body? The mystery gnawed at her, refusing to release its hold. And if you're curious about who this seemingly simple man really is, and how he would turn Sabrina's entire world upside down, don't forget to subscribe and follow the next chapter. Because one small act from Elliot that night would completely shatter the life of billionaire Sabrina Lennox. Elliot Hayes, a man of 34 years, hailed from a small, unassuming village in Oregon. His tousled brown hair, deep blue eyes tinged with a perpetual hint of sorrow, and rare but warm smile, were reminiscent of the first, fleeting sunlight of early winter. His hands were calloused, testament to years of hard labor, and his back carried a slight stoop, a subtle reminder of the physical demands of his past. 6 months ago, when Sabrina Lennox had interviewed him through a staffing agency, it wasn't his qualifications that had caught her attention. In fact, his resume was so sparse it was practically non-existent. Instead, it was his gaze, honest, calm, and utterly unpretentious. He had simply stated, "I need this job to support my daughter. I'll work hard." Sabrina hadn't hired him based on a polished facade, but on a quiet instinct, a gut feeling that told her this was a man she could trust. Over the past 6 months, Elliot had vindicated that instinct every single day. He arrived an hour early each morning, diligently performed his duties, and never once asked for overtime pay. His work was meticulous and careful, and he never complained. But what Sabrina didn't know was this. Each night, after finishing his shift at the Lennox mansion, Elliot embarked on a long journey, taking 2 buses back to a tiny, cramped apartment in Burbank, where he lived with his 8-year-old daughter, Nora. Nora had inherited her father's striking blue eyes and blonde hair, which she usually wore in 2 neat pigtails. Her smile was radiant, capable of lighting up a room, but her gaze held a depth that belied her young age. They were the eyes of a child who had already witnessed too much loss. 2 years prior, Nora's mother, Elena, had succumbed to late-stage breast cancer. In a desperate attempt to save her life, they had poured every cent of their savings into treatment, leaving Elliot with crushing medical debt and a 6-year-old girl traumatized by grief. Nora wasn't like other children. She was on the autism spectrum, which made communication a constant challenge. After the death of her mother, the one person who truly understood her unique emotional language, Nora had retreated into herself, almost entirely ceasing to speak. She expressed herself through drawings, and Elliot had painstakingly learned to decipher her emotions through every line and color. He had no choice but to become both father and mother, protector and nurturer. Elliot devoured books, watched countless videos, and joined online support groups, desperate to learn how to care for a child with autism. He learned to recognize when Nora needed silence, when she needed a hug, and how to transform her meltdowns into moments of connection. Every morning, he woke up at 5 a.m., prepared breakfast, escorted Nora to school, and then caught the bus to Beverly Hills. At night, no matter how exhausted he was, he sat beside her, drawing, talking about her mother, and learning together how to navigate their new reality. What Sabrina Lennox could never have imagined was that the quiet, unassuming man she had hired carried a past he had desperately tried to bury. A past that might explain his surprising knowledge of complex physical therapy techniques. Sabrina Lennox, at 42, was the formidable CEO of Lennox Innovations, a $2 billion tech conglomerate nestled in Silicon Beach, Los Angeles. She possessed sleek black hair, piercing gray eyes that seemed to dissect everything they surveyed, and the unwavering poise of a woman who could control every aspect of her life, except, perhaps, her own emotions. Born into a middle-class family in San Francisco, Sabrina had clawed her way to the top with relentless ambition and unwavering determination. But every success had come at a price. Her marriage to Landon Lennox, a renowned architect, had crumbled under the weight of Julian's diagnosis. Unable to cope with the immense pressure and Sabrina's relentless work schedule, Landon had left 2 years ago, relocating to New York. He sent regular child support payments, but never called or visited. Julian slowly forgot his father's voice, his image fading into a distant, almost mythical figure. Since then, Sabrina had retreated behind a fortress of her own making. She buried her emotions under a mountain of work, routinely spending 14 to 16 hours a day at the office. She hired the best medical teams, purchased the most advanced therapy equipment, yet rarely spent a full afternoon with her son. Guilt clung to her like a persistent shadow. Every time she saw Julian confined to his wheelchair, she couldn't help but wonder, was it my fault? Did I do something wrong during the pregnancy? Though doctors had repeatedly assured her that Duchenne muscular dystrophy was caused by a spontaneous genetic mutation, an anomaly for which no one was to blame, logic could never quell the internal storm. And so, she distanced herself from her own child. The further she pulled away, the more she lost connection, trust, and the tender, irreplaceable bond of motherhood. Julian Lennox, 6 years old, possessed curly blonde hair, bright green eyes, and a rare smile that had the power to illuminate an entire room. He had been born a healthy, energetic child, full of boundless curiosity and zest for life. But shortly after his 4th birthday, strange signs began to emerge. Constant falls, difficulty standing, a growing weakness that seemed to intensify with each passing day. The test results were a devastating verdict. Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a rare genetic disorder that progressively weakens muscles, ultimately leading to complete immobility. There was no cure. The average life expectancy, 20 to 30 years. From that moment forward, Julian's life revolved around therapy sessions, medical tests, and an ocean of silent tears. He relied on a wheelchair, leg braces, and assistance for even the simplest of tasks. But the most profound pain was the gnawing loneliness. His father was gone. His mother was perpetually absent. And his classmates didn't know how to interact with the special boy. Julian, once a curious explorer, had grown quiet, withdrawn, and increasingly isolated, until the day Elliot Hayes walked into his life. A man who seemed to come only to mop floors, yet brought with him something no doctor or expensive treatment ever could, hope. That Wednesday morning, Sabrina found herself unable to focus on a single meeting. Charts, reports, numbers, all of it blurred into a meaningless jumble. The image of Elliot and Julian in that room replayed in her mind like a film stuck on an endless loop. By the afternoon, Sabrina made a decision. She would go home early, this time not driven by curiosity, but by an undeniable need to confront the situation head-on. She had to know exactly what was happening inside her own house, and, more importantly, inside her son's life. Stepping into the pristine, stainless steel kitchen, she found Elliot preparing a snack for Julian. "Elliot, I need to talk to you." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were as cold and sharp as polished steel. About yesterday in Julian's room, Elliot froze mid-motion, a knife still in his hand, poised over a piece of fruit. His shoulders tensed, but his voice remained steady. "Mrs. Lennox, I can explain." "Explain?" Sabrina tilted her head, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You were playing doctor with my son, without my permission. You're not trained for that. You're just a janitor." Elliot lowered his head, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to overstep." Though his tone was humble and contrite, Sabrina sensed something simmering beneath the surface. A quiet conviction, a deep-seated truth that, if spoken aloud, had the potential to shatter everything. "Where did you learn those techniques?" she pressed, her voice now lower, but even more incisive. "How does a janitor know anything about physical therapy?" Elliot remained silent for a long moment, his fingers clasped tightly together. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but sincere. "My daughter, Nora. She was born with autism and developmental motor issues. My wife, Elena, was a therapist. Before she died of cancer, she taught me everything she knew for 6 years so I could care for our daughter myself. We couldn't afford expensive therapy sessions, so I had to learn. I became my daughter's therapist." When Elliot looked up, Sabrina saw, for the first time, the fire that burned behind his calm, blue eyes. Fierce, resilient, heartbreakingly genuine. "Nora is 8 now. She still struggles to communicate, but she's learned to regulate her emotions, to talk with friends, and, most importantly, she's learned to believe in herself. Doctors once said she'd never manage in a regular classroom, but today she's in 2nd grade, helping other kids." The words hit Sabrina with the force of an electric shock. The anger that had been simmering in her chest suddenly subsided, replaced by something else entirely. Admiration, tinged with a profound sense of shame. This man, with his rough hands and humble life, had achieved something she, a woman who had the world at her feet, had failed to do. He had healed a child through love. "You had no right to make decisions about my son's treatment without my consent," Sabrina said, though her voice had softened noticeably. "You're right." Elliot nodded, his eyes lowered. But Julian was sad. He'd lost all motivation. "I just wanted to help." At that moment, a small voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Mom, you're home early?" Julian appeared, sitting in his wheelchair, his eyes bright with a spark of hope. Sabrina turned around, and her heart clenched. Julian was sitting up straighter than before, his shoulders no longer slumped. He looked confident, radiant. In his eyes, She saw something she thought was gone forever. Light. "Julian, go to your room. The adults are talking." The words came out instinctively. Cold, rigid, unfeeling. The boy's smile flickered and vanished like a candle snuffed out by a sudden gust of wind. Elliot quickly knelt to meet Julian's gaze and said gently, "Why don't you wait for me in the living room? I'll teach you a new exercise in a few minutes." Julian nodded and wheeled himself away, his initial joy replaced by a quiet resignation. Silence filled the kitchen once again, heavy and oppressive. Elliot looked straight at Sabrina, his tone calm, but his eyes unwavering. "Mrs. Lennox, I know you see me as just a janitor. Maybe that's true. But your son is improving, and you know it." "Improving?" Sabrina gave a dry, humorless laugh. "You've only been around him for a short while." "No, ma'am," Elliot replied, his voice suddenly firm. "I've watched Julian every day for 6 months. I've seen him cry because he thinks no one cares. I've seen him push himself just so he wouldn't disappoint the professionals you hired. I've seen a boy who's smart, brave, and just needs someone, anyone, to truly believe in him." Elliot's words resonated within Sabrina's mind like the resounding peals of church bells. When was the last time she had truly seen her son? Not his illness, not his condition, but him. "My methods may not be as scientific as the experts," Elliot continued, his voice deep but warm, "but they're built on love, and sometimes that alone can make all the difference." Sabrina stood frozen, a tempest of emotions churning violently within her. Part of her wanted to reject everything he had said. Her pride as a powerful woman refused to accept that a janitor could achieve what her elite medical team could not. But another part, the mother buried deep inside, couldn't deny the truth shining before her eyes. Julian really was changing. Still, one question lingered, stubbornly refusing to fade away. How could Elliot pour so much time, so much energy into her son, after working exhausting hours every day? What drove this man, someone who had already lost so much, to keep giving? That question would soon lead Sabrina to a discovery, one that would forever alter the way she saw Elliot Hayes. In the days that followed, Sabrina Lennox began observing Elliot with new eyes. He was no longer just the quiet, unassuming janitor who moved silently through her house. He was an enigma, a mystery she couldn't stop thinking about. She needed to know who he truly was. Under the guise of improving security for Julian, Sabrina discreetly installed additional security cameras throughout the mansion. The official reason: enhanced safety. The real reason: to monitor Elliot's every move. What she saw in the recordings left her completely bewildered, though not in the way she had anticipated. The first thing she discovered was that Elliot arrived an hour early every morning and never once requested overtime pay. He stayed late, often after his shift had ended, simply to help Julian practice small mobility exercises. On weekends, when everyone else rested, he returned voluntarily to continue their sessions at home. No one was paying him to do any of it. Days later, Sabrina was astonished to discover that Elliot had ingeniously transformed Julian's room into a makeshift therapy space. Pillows were arranged as balance obstacles. Old clothing elastic bands became resistance tools. Plastic bottles filled with sand were repurposed as miniature dumbbells. Every ordinary household object in the multimillion-dollar mansion had been transformed into rehabilitation equipment, each item used with care and precision. One afternoon, Sabrina stumbled upon a thick notebook filled with Elliot's handwriting. Inside, he had meticulously documented every detail of Julian's progress. Which exercises worked best, the boy's emotional reactions to each session, every tiny milestone achieved. Julian held his balance for 3 seconds. Julian lifted his left arm on his own 5 times. Each line brimmed with patience, compassion, and unwavering belief. It was more heartfelt and more human than any professional report Sabrina had ever reviewed. One afternoon, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, Sabrina decided to follow Elliot after work. She wanted to witness how a man who gave so much of himself to her son lived when he thought no one was watching. From a distance, she watched Elliot leave the gated community, transferring between two buses as he headed towards a modest neighborhood in Burbank. He finally stopped in front of a small house with a neglected yard and peeling paint. About an hour later, he emerged, accompanied by a little blonde girl, around 8 years old. She walked a few steps behind him, not holding his hand, her eyes fixed on the ground, shy and withdrawn. Sabrina recognized her instantly. Nora, the daughter he had mentioned. They walked to a nearby park, where Elliot spread out a small blanket on the grass and produced a box of colored pencils. Nora sat down and began to draw in silence. Elliot didn't say much. He simply sat beside her, offering occasional, gentle observations. "That shade of blue is beautiful, Nora. That's the sky, right?" Nora nodded slightly without replying. Half an hour passed. A little boy from the park ran over, intrigued by her drawing. Nora immediately recoiled, covering her sketch with both hands. Elliot placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Nora, the boy just wants to see your drawing. You can say no if you don't want to, but you can also try showing him if you're ready." Nora looked up at her father, hesitated, and then slowly lowered her hands. The boy smiled. "It's beautiful." Then he ran off to play with his friends. Nora lifted her head, her eyes sparkling with pride. Elliot smiled and pulled her into a hug. "You did amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." From a distance, Sabrina stood frozen, her heart aching. This was no ordinary father. This was a man who understood every breath, every flicker of emotion in his child, who knew when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to nurture a soul that needed gentleness more than words. As Nora continued drawing, Sabrina approached. Elliot was sitting on a stone bench, his eyes fixed tenderly on his daughter. When he noticed her, he startled and stood up quickly. "Mrs. Lennox, what are you doing here?" "I want to know why you care so much about Julian," Sabrina said bluntly. Elliot looked uneasy, clearly unsettled by being followed. "I don't know what you want me to say." "The truth," Sabrina replied, her tone as sharp as broken glass. "A regular janitor doesn't spend hours every day with his employer's son." Elliot fell silent for a long moment. His gaze lingered on Nora, who was carefully adding color to her drawing. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "My daughter isn't just my responsibility, Mrs. Lennox. She's my reason to live. When the doctor said she'd never be able to communicate like other children, I promised myself I'd prove them wrong." "And did you?" Sabrina asked, her voice softer now. "Yes," Elliot nodded. "Not because of therapy exercises, but because I never stopped believing in her. I never let her think she was weak or broken." Then he looked directly into Sabrina's eyes, his tone calm, but filled with quiet power. "And when I look at Julian, I see the same thing. A child full of potential, surrounded by adults who, without realizing it, have already given up on him." The words cut into Sabrina like a blade. "Are you saying I gave up on my son?" she snapped, her voice trembling with wounded pride. Elliot shook his head. "I'm not blaming anyone, ma'am. I'm saying Julian needs someone who believes in the impossible." At that moment, Nora stood up and ran over, holding up her new drawing. "Daddy, I finished." Elliot crouched down, smiling as he took it. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. This is our family, isn't it?" Nora nodded, then pointed to each figure with her tiny finger. "That's you. That's me. And that's Mommy. She's watching us from heaven." Elliot pulled her close, holding her tightly. His shoulders trembled, but he forced a smile, refusing to let the tears fall. Sabrina turned away, her heart sinking. She didn't want to intrude on such a sacred moment. But in that instant, she understood everything. Elliot Hayes wasn't just helping Julian move again. He was continuing the legacy of his late wife, a woman who had dedicated her life to healing forgotten children. And through that act of love, he was still healing himself. Yet one mystery still kept Sabrina Lennox awake at night. In the camera footage, she had noticed something strange. On several occasions, Elliot left the mansion very late, almost 10 p.m., always carrying the same old black canvas bag. Where was he going at that hour, and what was inside that bag? A week later, Sabrina resolved to find out for herself. On Thursday night, Close to 10 p.m., Elliot left the estate as usual, the familiar black bag slung over his shoulder. Sabrina quietly followed in her car, keeping a safe distance. Elliot took 2 bus transfers, heading east towards downtown Los Angeles. Finally, he stopped in front of a worn-down building with peeling paint and a faded wooden sign that read, St. Mary's Community Center Special Children's Support Program. Through the dusty window, Sabrina squinted, and what she saw made her forget to breathe. Elliot stood in the middle of a small, modest room, dimly lit by a few flickering fluorescent bulbs. Around him were more than a dozen children, each grappling with their own unique challenges. A boy in a wheelchair, his legs secured with braces. A girl on crutches taking slow, trembling steps. A child with Down syndrome, carefully stacking colored blocks. Several children on the autism spectrum, just like Nora. Elliot, the man she once thought could only hold a broom and a mop, now stood at the heart of the room, guiding each child's movement, each breath. He spoke softly, patiently, his voice laced with encouragement and a touch of humor. The mystery bag was filled not with valuables, but with homemade therapy tools. Elastic bands, softballs, sand-filled bottles, foam cushions, even wooden spoons transformed into reflex trainers. The children called him by one name, Teacher Elliot. Sabrina quietly pushed the door open and stepped inside, keeping to the corner. No one noticed her. A little girl named Maria, about 7 years old, was attempting to walk with leg braces. Elliot knelt beside her, his voice full of encouragement. Come on, Maria. Let's try 5 steps today. Okay, just 5. Maria pressed her lips together and nodded, her face etched with determination. Step by trembling step. 1, 2, 3. By the 5th, she burst into laughter, her face shining like sunlight. Elliot clapped his hands, his smile radiant. That's wonderful, Maria. Next week we'll try 7. In another corner, David, a 9-year-old with Down syndrome, was carefully sorting colored blocks. Elliot watched him closely. Red goes with red, remember? You've got this, buddy. David tried, failed, and tried again until finally the blocks matched perfectly. He shouted with joy, pumping his fist in the air. Elliot laughed and gave him a high five. Nearby, an exhausted-looking older woman wiped away tears. When Elliot passed by, she caught his hand. Teacher Elliot, thank you. Maria hasn't smiled since the accident 6 months ago. And tonight she did. You gave me my daughter back. Elliot smiled gently, his voice catching with emotion. Maria's brave, Mrs. Rodriguez. She's the one healing herself. From the corner, Sabrina felt her chest tighten. The man before her wasn't just teaching these children to move. He was teaching them to believe they deserved to live fully. When the session ended, the parents gradually led their children home. Elliot stayed behind, cleaning the space and packing his tools. When he turned around, he froze. Sabrina was standing in the doorway. Mrs. Lennox, I saw everything, she said calmly, stepping inside. Her eyes swept the room. The cracked wooden floor, the peeling walls, the chipped plastic chairs. Yet the air felt warm, full of purpose and care. You do this every night? Not every night, Elliot replied quietly. Just 3 evenings a week. I spend the rest with Nora. And you don't get paid? No grants, no support? No, ma'am. This volunteer work. Sabrina fell silent, her throat constricted. Here was a man who took 2 buses each way, worked all day, raised a daughter alone, and still found the strength and compassion to help these children. Why, Elliot? She finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why do you do all this? Elliot settled heavily into a worn chair, his hands clasped together as if holding onto the last vestiges of strength. Fatigue lined his face, etched deep by hardship, yet a gentle, persistent light shone in his eyes. When my wife Elalina was alive, he began, his voice a low rumble. She dedicated herself to children like these. She was an occupational therapist, you know, but not for the money. Never for the money. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that every child, regardless of their challenges, deserved a chance to flourish. He looked up, his blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. After she passed, I made a promise to myself, a solemn vow, that I would carry on her work. I don't have her fancy degrees, her prestigious clinic, but I have these hands. He held them out, calloused and strong. And I have this heart. And sometimes that's enough. Sabrina stood rooted to the spot, a wave of emotion washing over her, stealing her voice. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole her breath. This was genuine nobility, the kind that transcended the superficial trappings of wealth and power. It wasn't about social status or recognition, but about the quiet, selfless act of giving without expecting anything in return. Elliot, you deserve so much more than this, Sabrina finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. You deserve acknowledgement. You deserve to be properly compensated. Elliot simply smiled, a gentle, knowing expression, and shook his head. I'm not doing it for recognition, Mrs. Lennox. I do it because these kids need me. That's all there is to it. The words hung in the air, simple, unadorned, yet profoundly resonant. In that humble, slightly dilapidated community center, they echoed with the force of a sacred truth. For the first time in her privileged life, Sabrina Lennox, the woman who had always believed she possessed everything, understood a fundamental truth. There are things in this world that money can never, ever buy. The following morning, Sabrina Lennox sat in her sleek, glass-walled office. The sprawling Los Angeles skyline laid out before her like a glittering map. But her mind refused to focus. The financial projections on her computer screen blurred, replaced by a vivid montage of images. The joyful faces of the children at St. Mary's Community Center, Maria's infectious smile, David's proud gaze, Mrs. Rodriguez's tears of gratitude, and above all, Elliot's quiet, unwavering presence. The man she had dismissed as a mere janitor had revealed himself to be a quiet hero, a beacon of hope, transforming the lives of countless children with nothing more than his 2 hands and a heart overflowing with compassion. But this time, Sabrina didn't want to dissect him from afar, through the cold lens of a camera or through clandestine notes. She needed to understand him, to truly understand him, by hearing the truth directly from his own lips. That evening, Sabrina asked Elliot to remain after his shift. They sat facing each other in her opulent living room, the warm glow of the firelight dancing on the crystal wine glass she held, while Elliot cradled a simple mug of black coffee. Elliot, she began, her tone calm but serious. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you possess any formal qualifications in therapy? Elliot remained silent for a few seconds, as if gathering his thoughts, then exhaled softly, like a man preparing to release a burden he had carried for years. Yes, ma'am, he said slowly, carefully. I hold a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy from Cal State, Los Angeles. I graduated 5 years ago on a full scholarship, working graveyard shifts to make ends meet. Sabrina froze, completely speechless. You mean, you're a trained therapist? She leaned forward, incredulous. Then why on earth are you working as a janitor? A faint, weary smile touched Elliot's face, the kind of smile worn by those who have learned to accept life's harsh realities. Because, he said quietly, no one wanted to hire a single father with no clinical experience as a pediatric therapist in the upscale private hospitals around here. I sent out 63 applications, clinics, hospitals, rehabilitation centers all over Los Angeles. Every answer was the same. We're looking for someone with experience in high-end environments. Some even told me outright, our clients are more comfortable working with female therapists. Sabrina clenched her jaw, fury simmering beneath the surface. That's blatant sexism. It's discrimination. Plain and simple. Elliot nodded, his voice calm but laced with a deep weariness. Maybe, but I couldn't afford a drawn-out legal battle. I had a daughter to raise and a mountain of medical debt from Elalina's cancer treatments. So, I swallowed my pride and took any job that could keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. It was the first time Sabrina had heard the full, unvarnished truth of Elliot's story. The story of a devoted father, a loving husband, and a man who had sacrificed everything for the sake of love and responsibility. Elliot recounted how he and Elena had met in college. She was a senior, radiating confidence and grace, and he was a shy sophomore, instantly captivated by her warmth. They fell deeply in love, married young, and welcomed Nora into their lives before either had truly found their footing. When Nora was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2, Elena made the difficult decision to leave her promising career at an elite clinic to dedicate herself to caring for their daughter full-time. Elliot, facing mounting expenses, reluctantly dropped out of college and worked tirelessly at a series of grueling full-time jobs, construction, night shifts, anything that paid the bills. But he never completely abandoned his dream. At night, after putting Nora to bed, he studied online, devoured free courses, and read every medical textbook he could get his hands on. After 4 long, arduous years, he finally earned his degree, the very year Nora turned 6. 2 months later, their world shattered. Elena was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. A year of desperate, agonizing treatment consumed everything they had: money, strength, hope. When she finally succumbed to the disease, Nora was only 6 years old. Elliot's voice faltered, cracking with the pain of the memory. After Elena passed, he continued, his voice barely a whisper, I tried to re-enter the field, but the doors remained firmly closed. They said I lacked hands-on experience, and that I needed flexible hours to care for Nora, something the private clinics would never allow. He looked directly at Sabrina, his eyes filled with a deep weariness, yet unwavering in their resolve. Eventually, I realized I had to choose between my career and my daughter, and I chose her. Every single time. Silence filled the room, heavy, almost sacred. For the first time, Sabrina saw him not through the critical eyes of an employer, measured by status, title, and income, but as a human being, a man who had willingly given up everything for the sake of love, compassion, and unwavering duty. How did you find St. Mary's Community Center? Sabrina asked softly, breaking the silence. Elliot offered a modest, self-deprecating smile. I didn't find it, he said. I built it. Sabrina blinked, taken aback. Elliot explained that, a year earlier, he had returned to St. Mary's Church in East LA, where he and Elena had once volunteered. He approached the parish priest and humbly requested permission to use a small, unused backroom to hold free exercise and mobility sessions for children with special needs. It began with just 3 children, the children of neighbors, and a few single mothers who simply couldn't afford therapy. Word spread quickly through the close-knit community. 3 became 5, then 12, then 15. Because I don't have an official therapy license, not enough clinical hours, I can't open a private practice, Elliot explained. But I can still teach movement and coordination exercises as a volunteer. It's the only legal loophole that allows me to keep helping these kids. Sabrina nodded slowly, the last pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. And when you met Julian, I saw Nora in him, Elliot replied simply. And Elena, he added, his voice quiet with emotion. A child who needed someone to believe in him. I know I should have asked for your permission first, but I was afraid you'd say no, and Julian needed help now, not after endless paperwork and bureaucratic delays. Sabrina didn't respond. She simply looked at him, her expression softening, her mind racing, burdened with thought. So, she asked gently, tentatively, everything you've done for Julian, it was real therapy? Yes, Elliot said firmly, his voice unwavering. Every technique I used is evidence-based, grounded in established medical principles. The only thing I added, he paused, smiling faintly, is something that many professionals seem to forget. And what's that? Sabrina asked, her curiosity piqued. Love, he whispered. And in that moment, Sabrina Lennox, the woman who had once believed that money could solve any problem, finally truly understood. Some miracles can't be bought, no matter how vast the fortune. They're built quietly, persistently, by hearts that refuse to stop caring, by hands that tirelessly reach out to those in need. That night, Sabrina Lennox couldn't sleep. She lay still in the darkness, the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains and painting pale streaks across the ceiling. Every word Elliot had spoken replayed in her mind, echoing in the silence. The story of Elena, of Nora, of the children at St. Mary's Community Center. And for the first time in years, she was forced to confront her own values, to examine the foundation upon which she had built her life. For so long, Sabrina had lived by false gods. She had mistakenly believed that money, power, and social status defined a person's worth. But Elliot, a humble janitor, had shown her that true greatness was found in the ability to give without expecting anything in return, to love without condition, and to believe in the potential of others, even when they couldn't see it themselves. The next morning, Sabrina awoke with a firm decision, a conviction that would alter both their lives forever. That morning, she summoned Elliot to her home office, the elegant room lined with books, bathed in the warm light of the morning sun, overlooking the lush green garden. "Elliot, please have a seat," she said, her tone calm but noticeably softer than usual. Elliot hesitated for a moment, then sat down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, a quiet tension evident in his eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation yesterday," Sabrina began, her voice steady, "and I've realized that I made a terrible mistake." Elliot swallowed hard, waiting, bracing himself for what was to come. "My mistake," she said slowly, deliberately, "wasn't hiring you. It was not seeing you, the real you, from the very beginning." She slid a thick envelope across the mahogany desk. "This is your new contract," Sabrina said, her voice firm but kind. "I want you to become Julian's official private therapist, working with him full-time. Your salary will be 6 times your current pay, with full medical insurance for you and Nora, and flexible hours so you can still take care of your daughter. And," she added before he could interrupt, "I want you to consider this as back pay for all the time that you weren't recognized and compensated for your hard work." Elliot opened the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. "Mrs. Lennox, I don't know what to say." "Then let me finish," Sabrina said, allowing herself a faint, genuine smile. "I'm also funding a complete renovation of the St. Mary's Community Center. You'll get brand new equipment, a dedicated professional team, and a permanent operating budget to ensure its continued success. I want you to lead it as the medical director with full control over the program." Elliot froze, the contract slipping from his grasp. Tears welled up in his eyes and began to stream silently down his face. "Mrs. Lennox, I can't accept this. It's too much, too generous." "No, Elliot," Sabrina said, leaning forward, her voice firm but filled with compassion. "You can and you will. This isn't charity. It's justice. You deserve recognition, not just for your work with Julian, but for every single child whose life you've touched and transformed. You've given them the greatest gift, the belief that they can accomplish anything." She paused, her voice softening even further. "And one more thing, I'll fund a full scholarship for you to earn your master's degree in pediatric therapy at USC. It's a flexible program, designed for working professionals, so you'll still be able to care for Nora and continue your work at St. Mary's." Elliot lowered his head, covering his face with both hands, his shoulders shaking with the force of his emotions. He began to cry, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of relief, of validation, of finally being seen and appreciated for who he truly was. The tears of a man who had endured far too much hardship and was finally, after years of struggle, being given a chance to fulfill his potential. For years, he had buried his dreams, sacrificing his own ambitions for the sake of his family. And now, someone had just handed them back to him, wrapped in hope and opportunity. But Sabrina knew that the final, most important decision didn't belong to her. It belonged to Julian. She gently called her son into the office. The little boy rolled in on his wheelchair, his cheeks flushed with excitement, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. Sabrina knelt down, meeting him at eye level, her hand resting gently on his knee. "Julian, sweetheart, I have something very important to ask you." "Yes, Mom," he said, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Would you like Mr. Elliot to become your official therapist?" Sabrina asked, her voice filled with warmth and affection. "That means he won't be cleaning anymore. He'll be here just to help you train, to help you get stronger. Julian's eyes widened even further, sparkling as if Christmas had arrived early. Really, Mom? He exclaimed, his voice filled with joy. Elliot will be here more? Yes, honey, Sabrina replied, smiling. He will. Julian turned to Elliot, his smile radiating pure, unadulterated joy. The kind of smile that Sabrina hadn't seen in years, a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Elliot, that means you're not leaving me, right? Elliot knelt down beside Julian's wheelchair and wrapped him in a warm, comforting hug. I'm not going anywhere, little man, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise. Julian squeezed his neck tightly and whispered, You're like the dad I never had. Sabrina froze, a sharp ache blooming in her chest. Not because the boy was wrong, but because he was right. She realized then that her son's struggle wasn't just about muscles or movement. It was about connection, about the absence of someone who truly believed in him, someone who stood by him without reservation, someone who loved him unconditionally. It was about the deep, unshakable bond that had formed between them, a bond built on trust, respect, and unwavering support. 3 weeks later, the miracle that no one had dared to hope for finally happened. That morning, Sabrina was working in her downstairs office when she heard a panicked, yet undeniably excited voice, calling her name. Mom, Mom, come quick. Her heart skipped a beat. She ran out of the office and froze in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. Julian was standing. No wheelchair, no cumbersome braces, no hands supporting him. He was standing, trembling slightly, but upright, defying all expectations. Elliot knelt in front of him, his arms outstretched, ready to catch him if he faltered. Mom, look, Julian cried, his voice breaking with emotion. I'm standing. Sabrina covered her mouth with her hand, tears flooding her eyes, blurring her vision. She took a slow, hesitant step forward, afraid that even a breath might break the fragile magic of that moment. You did it, Julian, she whispered, her voice trembling with awe and gratitude. My brave boy, you did it. Julian took a deep breath, his eyes shining with unwavering determination. I'm going to walk now, Mom. He looked at Elliot for reassurance. Elliot says I'm ready. Slowly, little man, Elliot said softly, his voice filled with pride. Remember what I taught you. Small steps, deep breaths. Trust your legs. You've got this. Julian nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. 1, 2, 3. He lifted his right foot, moved it forward a few inches, then shifted his weight and lifted his left. The whole room held its breath, suspended in anticipation. 3 steps. He took 3 full, independent steps before his legs finally gave way, and he began to fall. But Elliot was there in an instant, catching him safely in his arms. Julian clung to him, breathing hard, his eyes shining with triumph. I did it, Elliot. 3 steps. I did it. Elliot's voice broke as he smiled through his own tears. I'm so proud of you, Julian. So proud. Sabrina dropped to her knees, wrapping them both in her arms, sobbing openly, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. My son, you're incredible. You're the bravest person I know. For the first time in years, a feeling of genuine, unadulterated hope filled her heart. A hope that transcended the sterile pronouncements of doctors and the limitations of medical science. It was a real, tangible hope, born from unwavering faith, unconditional love, and the resilience of the human spirit. And she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the miracle standing before her wasn't the product of money, machines, or medicine. It was born from one ordinary man, a man whose hands could clean a floor or lift a child, and whose heart had never stopped believing in the power of healing through love. But every beautiful story, every hard-won victory, must eventually pass through its own storm, face its own set of challenges. 1 month after Elliot Hayes officially became Julian's therapist, a series of unforeseen obstacles began to arise, relentless, fierce, and seemingly without warning. During Julian's routine follow-up appointment, Dr. Richard Preston, The renowned pediatric neurologist who had overseen Julian's case since the beginning, examined the latest test results with a furrowed brow, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Lennox," he said slowly, his voice measured, "I'm seeing some unusual improvements in Julian." "What do you mean, doctor?" Sabrina asked, her heart pounding in her chest, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a progressive disease," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "In theory, the muscles weaken and deteriorate over time. They don't get stronger." "It could be because of the intensive therapy," Sabrina said quickly, clinging desperately to the hope that Elliot had ignited within her. "Elliot's working with him every day. He's pushing him, challenging him." Dr. Preston nodded faintly, but his gaze remained sharp, scrutinizing. "Or," he said, pausing for emphasis, "the initial diagnosis was incorrect. I want to reevaluate everything. We need to run a new series of tests, confirm the diagnosis." Sabrina froze, the blood draining from her face. If the diagnosis had been wrong all along, then were all of Elliot's efforts in vain? Or, even more disturbingly, had he somehow discovered something that modern medicine had yet to understand, a revolutionary approach to treatment that defied conventional wisdom? But the conversation didn't end there. When Julian left the room, Dr. Preston held Sabrina back, his expression grave. "Mrs. Lennox," he said, lowering his voice, "I've heard that you hired someone without a valid clinical license to treat your son. Someone named Elliot Hayes." Sabrina stiffened, instinctively defensive. "Elliot has a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy, but he doesn't possess a clinical license, Dr. Preston interrupted, his eyes sharp and disapproving. "Legally, he is not authorized to practice therapy. If any complications arise, the consequences could be severe, not only for him but for you as well. You could be held liable for negligence." The words hit Sabrina like a physical blow, a heavy weight pressing against her chest, stealing her breath. For the first time, she found herself questioning her own judgment, her own unwavering trust in Elliot. Had she been too blinded by hope? Had her love for her son clouded her judgment as a mother, leading her to make a reckless and potentially dangerous decision? Then came the real test, the challenge that would shake her faith to its core. Not through cautious words and veiled warnings, but through the raw, agonizing reality of pain. It was a Thursday afternoon. Elliot and Julian were practicing a new set of exercises in the therapy room when Sabrina heard a sudden, piercing scream, a sound that ripped through the air and shattered the peaceful tranquility of the house. "Ah, my legs! They hurt. They hurt so much." She raced down the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest, her pulse throbbing in her ears, fear clawing at her throat. She burst into the therapy room and saw Julian sprawled on the floor, his face contorted in pain, his legs cramped and trembling uncontrollably. Elliot knelt beside him, his face etched with worry and concern, trying to remain calm and reassuring. "Julian, tell me, where does it hurt? Can you show me?" "My legs," the boy sobbed, clutching at his thighs. "They hurt so much. Feels like they're on fire." "What happened here?" Sabrina demanded, her voice laced with panic and anger. "What did you do to him?" Elliot looked up, his eyes filled with guilt and remorse, though his voice remained steady and controlled. "I think it's just a muscle strain, Mrs. Lennox. We were trying a new exercise. I may have pushed him too hard, gone a little too fast." "Pushed him too hard?" Sabrina's voice cracked, her fear giving way to a surge of anger. "What on earth were you doing to my son? He's in agony." "I'm sorry," Elliot said softly, his gaze fixed on Julian, his face pale with guilt. "I misjudged his strength today. I didn't realize he was so fatigued. It was my mistake." Sabrina, her mind reeling with fear and recrimination, immediately called for an ambulance. While they waited for the paramedics to arrive, she stood silently in the corner of the room, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, not saying a word, not even looking at Elliot. Just hours ago, the space between them had been filled with warmth and trust, a testament to the bond they had forged. Now, it was a vast, icy chasm, colder and more terrifying than fear itself. At the hospital, after what seemed like an eternity of anxious waiting, the diagnosis was finally confirmed. Severe muscle strain in both legs. Julian would need complete rest and immobilization for at least 2 weeks. Intensive physical therapy would be required to gradually rebuild his strength and mobility. Dr. Preston visited later, his face cold and stern, his eyes radiating disapproval. "This is exactly what I warned you about, Mrs. Lennox," he said, his tone edged with reproach. Unsupervised therapy, particularly when administered by someone without proper training and experience, can often cause more harm than good. It can lead to serious complications, setbacks that can undo months of progress. Sabrina sat beside Julian's hospital bed, holding his small, sleeping hand, her mind awash in a sea of guilt and self-doubt. Had she been wrong to trust Elliot so implicitly? Had her blind faith led her son into pain, jeopardizing his health and well-being? Had she allowed her own desperate hope to override her good judgment as a mother? That evening, as dusk settled over the city, Elliot came to the hospital, holding a small bouquet of colorful wildflowers and a paper crane that Nora had meticulously folded for Julian, a symbol of hope and healing. But as he reached the door to Julian's room, Sabrina was already standing there, blocking his path, her face composed, her expression unyielding, her eyes cold and distant. "I think you should go home, Elliot," she said quietly but firmly, her voice trembling slightly. "It's best if you stay away from Julian for a while." "Mrs. Lennox, please, just let me explain," Elliot pleaded, his eyes filled with pain and remorse. "Explain what?" She cut him off, her voice sharp and trembling. "Explain how you hurt my son? Explain how I was foolish enough to trust you, to believe that you could actually help him? Explain how wrong I was to let you into our lives?" Elliot's eyes darkened with pain, but he remained silent for a moment, struggling to find the right words. "I would never intentionally hurt Julian," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "That boy means the world to me. I care about him deeply. Maybe I forgot that you're not my son's doctor." "Elliot," Sabrina interrupted, her voice low and shaking with emotion. "Maybe I forgot that you're not qualified to make medical decisions, that you're not equipped to handle the complexities of his condition. Maybe I forgot that you're just a janitor." The words fell between them like a sharp blade, cutting through the fragile bond they had built, severing the ties of trust and respect that had once connected them. Elliot stood still for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the floor, his shoulders slumped with defeat. Then he nodded slowly, acknowledging her words, accepting her judgment. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't offer any further explanation. He just turned away, his face etched with sadness and disappointment, and walked slowly down the long, sterile corridor, his footsteps echoing beneath the cold fluorescent lights until they faded into the silence of the night. And inside the room, Sabrina Lennox sat alone beside her sleeping son, listening to the steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, the only sound left in a night where hope itself seemed to be slipping away, lost in the darkness of doubt and regret. The following 2 weeks were the darkest of Sabrina Lennox's life. The once lively, vibrant mansion was now so silent that she could hear the wind slide softly past the window panes, a constant reminder of the emptiness that had enveloped her world. Julian remained in the hospital, quiet, withdrawn, and distant, a shadow of his former self. He asked about Elliot almost every day, his voice filled with a heartbreaking mix of longing and confusion. Sabrina avoided the question each time, offering vague, non-committal answers. She told him that Elliot was busy with other commitments, or that he'd be back soon as he felt better. But he didn't come. Sabrina had given him a temporary leave of absence, a polite way of saying that he was no longer welcome in their lives, at least for the foreseeable future. She needed time to reassess the situation, to determine the best course of action for her son. Then, something strange and unexpected happened. Without Elliot's constant encouragement, his unwavering belief in his abilities, Julian stopped improving. In fact, he began to regress, losing ground that he had fought so hard to gain. The new team of highly qualified therapists that Sabrina hired followed every textbook protocol. meticulously adhering to the established medical guidelines. Yet Julian refused to engage with them. He remained stubbornly silent, avoided their eyes, and spent most of his time staring blankly out the window, lost in his own thoughts. One night, as Sabrina sat beside his bed, her heart aching with a sense of helplessness, Julian's small, wavering voice broke the oppressive stillness of the room. Faint but clear, filled with a child's innocent sincerity. "Mom, do you hate Mr. Elliot?" The unexpected question struck her like a lightning bolt, jolting her out of her reverie. "No, sweetheart," she said softly, stroking his hair. "Of course I don't hate Mr. Elliot. Where did you get that idea? Then why isn't he coming back?" Tears welled up in his eyes and rolled silently down his cheeks, leaving wet streaks on his pale skin. "I miss him, Mom. I miss him so much." Sabrina took his hand gently, her heart breaking at the sight of his distress. "He made you hurt, Julian," she said, her voice filled with concern. "Mommy just wants you to be safe. I don't want anything to happen to you." "It wasn't his fault, Mom," Julian cried out, his voice rising in protest. "I wanted to impress him. I wanted to show him how strong I was. I tried too hard. It's my fault that I got hurt, not his." Sabrina pulled him into her arms, holding him close, the weight of guilt tightening around her chest like a steel vice. Through his sobs, Julian whispered, "I love Mr. Elliot. He's the only one who really believes I can do things. Not like the doctors. Not like you." The last words pierced her like a sharp blade, cutting through her carefully constructed defenses, exposing the raw truth that she had been desperately trying to avoid. She stayed silent because she knew deep down that he was right. She had tried to deny it, but the truth was undeniable. Deep down, Sabrina had never truly believed that her son could overcome the limitations of his disease. She had accepted it as an irreversible sentence, a lifelong struggle that he would never be able to escape. She had approached his treatment with a sense of resignation, a quiet despair that had subtly undermined his own efforts. But Elliot hadn't. Elliot had believed in him even when no one else dared to, even when she didn't. He had seen Julian's potential, his inner strength, and had nurtured it with unwavering dedication and unwavering faith. He had given him the most precious gift of all, the belief that he could achieve the impossible. The next morning, Sabrina called Dr. Richard Preston and asked to meet with him privately, as soon as possible. She knew that she needed to confront her own doubts, to seek his honest opinion, and to make a decision that would be in Julian's best interest, regardless of her own fears and reservations. "Doctor," she began, her voice firm but filled with a quiet determination, as they sat in his office, surrounded by diplomas and medical journals. "I need you to be completely honest with me. I need the truth, no matter how difficult it may be to hear." "What is it, Mrs. Lennox?" Dr. Preston asked, his expression serious and attentive. "Was my son really improving before the muscle strain? Or was it all just in my head? Was I just seeing what I wanted to see, clinging to a false hope that wasn't based in reality?" Dr. Preston sighed, removed his glasses, and opened Julian's thick medical file, flipping through the pages with practiced ease. "Mrs. Lennox, I have to admit something," he said, his voice measured and thoughtful. Comparing the current test results to those from 6 months ago, before the incident, Julian showed remarkable improvement. Muscle strength increased by nearly 40%. Motor coordination improved by over 50%. "I've never seen such numbers in a patient with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's unprecedented." Sabrina's eyes widened, her heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and elation. "Then Elliot was right," she whispered, almost to herself. Dr. Preston nodded slightly, his tone softer now, more understanding. "He did something. That much is certain. I can't explain it medically. Perhaps a combination of intensive physical therapy and a strong psychological influence." Julian clearly believed in Mr. Hayes, and sometimes that belief, that unwavering faith, can create real, measurable change. It can tap into reserves of strength and resilience that we didn't even know existed. He paused before continuing. "As for the muscle strain, honestly, that can happen in any intensive rehabilitation program. even under my direct supervision. It's a risk you take when you push the body to its limits. According to the records, Mr. Hayes handled the situation properly. He stopped the exercise immediately, assessed the situation, and called for help. There were no professional mistakes made, no signs of negligence. Sabrina felt as if a massive weight had been lifted off her shoulders, freeing her from the burden of guilt and self-doubt that had been crushing her spirit. "Then, doctor, what should I do now? What's the best course of action for Julian?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. Dr. Preston smiled faintly, a glimmer of encouragement in his eyes. "Bring him back, Mrs. Lennox," he said, his voice gentle. "Bring Mr. Hayes back into Julian's life. But this time, do it the right way, the responsible way. I'll work with Mr. Hayes as a team, collaborating closely to ensure that Julian receives the best possible care. I'll bring the medical foundation, the scientific expertise, and he'll bring what we doctors often forget: love and faith, the human connection that can make all the difference." That afternoon, Sabrina drove to Burbank, where Elliot lived. It was the first time she had ever truly stepped into his world, seen the environment in which he lived and raised his daughter. It was a modest apartment complex, nestled in a quiet residential neighborhood. One bedroom, a small living area that doubled as a kitchen, and a narrow bathroom. Not luxurious, not even particularly comfortable, but tidy, well-maintained, and filled with a sense of peace and tranquility. On the walls hung dozens of Nora's drawings, vibrant and whimsical creations that reflected the bright and cheerful spirit of the little girl who had made them. There were drawings of smiling suns, cheerful sunflowers, and one particularly striking picture of a smiling boy in a wheelchair, surrounded by two other figures, presumably Elliot and Nora, all bathed in the warm glow of a summer sun. When Elliot opened the door, his eyes widened in surprise. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say, his face a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Mrs. Lennox," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? May I offer you a glass of water? May I come in, Elliot?" Sabrina asked, her voice soft and sincere. He nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering, and stepped aside, allowing her to enter the apartment. Nora sat on the floor, diligently coloring in a coloring book, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up, her eyes filled with a curious mix of shyness and curiosity, but remained silent, waiting for her father's cue. "Hello, Nora," Sabrina said gently, offering her a warm smile. "Your drawings are beautiful. You're a very talented artist." The little girl glanced at her father, seeking his approval, waiting for him to tell her how to respond. Elliot gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, reassuring her that it was okay to speak. Nora hesitated for a moment, then picked up her newest drawing and handed it to Sabrina, offering it as a peace offering. It showed three figures: a man, a blonde girl, and a boy in a wheelchair, all smiling beneath a bright blue sky, holding hands in a circle of friendship. "That's Julian," Nora said softly, her first words to Sabrina, her voice barely a whisper. "You know Julian?" Sabrina asked, surprised. "Dad told me all about him," she said, a small smile appearing on her face. "He said Julian's really brave, and that he's working really hard to get better." Sabrina held the picture tight, her throat closing with emotion. Elliot hadn't just helped Julian overcome his physical challenges. He had taught his daughter compassion, empathy, and the courage to see the good in others, to look beyond their disabilities and recognize their inner strength. After Nora had been tucked into bed, sound asleep, Sabrina and Elliot sat across from each other on the old, worn sofa, a tangible sense of awkwardness hanging in the air. The room was quiet except for the steady ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, each tick marking the passage of time, the weight of unspoken words. "Elliot," Sabrina began, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the depth of her emotions. "I came here to apologize. I treated you unfairly. I said terrible things to you. I blamed you for my own fear, for my own doubts. I was wrong, Elliot. I was so wrong." Elliot shook his head gently, his gaze compassionate. "You don't owe me an apology, Mrs. Lennox," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I was responsible for Julian's injury. Intentional or not, it was my fault that he got hurt. I should have been more careful. I should have paid. Let the world decide right and wrong, she thought, but to not believe in what her son believed in. That was unforgivable. Elliot absorbed her words in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy in the air. Finally, he nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, and pulled Sabrina into a brief, heartfelt embrace. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but a profound expression of gratitude and forgiveness. I'll come back, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Not for the title or the salary, but for Julian. That boy deserves the best chance we can give him. In that moment, the billionaire and the single father, who had once inhabited completely different worlds, found common ground. They shared the unwavering belief that love, freely given, possessed the power to heal even the deepest wounds. 1 week later, Julian was discharged from the hospital. The instant he crossed the threshold of the mansion and saw Elliot waiting in the living room, his face transformed, radiating joy like the sun rising inside the house. Elliot, he cried. His voice filled with pure delight, and he attempted to run, his legs still shaky from his ordeal. Elliot rushed forward and enveloped him in a tight, reassuring hug. I'm here, little man, he murmured, his voice full of affection. I promised you I wasn't going anywhere. From that moment on, everything began to shift, to transform. Dr. Preston honored his commitment, assembling an integrated care team for Julian. It was a holistic model blending medicine, therapy, and psychological support. Dr. Patricia Morgan, a compassionate child psychotherapist, helped Julian process his emotions, overcome his fears, and build his self-confidence. Emily Ross, a skilled nutritionist, designed a specialized diet to support muscle regeneration and boost his energy levels. Each week, the entire team gathered around the small table in Sabrina's office, reviewing Julian's progress, brainstorming new ideas, and fine-tuning his therapy plan. For the first time, science and human kindness resonated in perfect harmony. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't Julian's. It was Sabrina Lennox's. The woman who had once devoted 16 hours a day to meetings and multimillion-dollar deals began to drastically scale back her demanding schedule. Now, every afternoon at precisely 5 p.m., she would leave the office, fighting through traffic, determined to be on time for her son's therapy session. At first, sitting on the floor in sweatpants, awkwardly attempting simple movements with her child, felt unnatural, even embarrassing. The woman who had once lived in stilettos and boardrooms now found herself crouching down, gently placing her hands on her son's trembling legs. Elliot guided her with infinite patience. Mrs. Lennox, place your hands here. Feel Julian's muscles as he tries to lift his leg. You'll notice the difference between tension and relaxation. Sabrina followed his instructions, her hands trembling slightly, and for the first time, she truly connected with her child. Not through words or logic, but through raw, unfiltered feeling. She could sense each muscle straining, each careful breath he took, each small victory Julian fought so hard to achieve. You're doing so well, Julian, she whispered, her voice unsteady but overflowing with warmth. I'm so very proud of you. Julian looked up at her, his eyes round and shining with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Mom, do you really think so? Sabrina smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. I've always been proud of you, sweetheart, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I just didn't know how to say it. One Saturday afternoon, Sabrina decided to orchestrate something special, a small celebration of Julian's progress and the burgeoning connections forming around him. She extended an invitation to Elliot and Nora to join them at the mansion for lunch. Nora stepped into the vast foyer of the house, her eyes wide with awe and wonder. She spun around once, taking in the grandeur of the space, and looked up at the soaring ceiling. It's like a castle from a fairy tale, she whispered, her voice filled with enchantment. Julian, being carefully guided down the stairs by Elliot, beamed when he saw her. He could now walk with assistance, a milestone that had seemed utterly impossible just 2 months earlier. "Hi! I've heard all about you from your dad," Julian said, his voice bubbling with excitement. Nora glanced at Julian, then at the wheelchair parked discreetly in the corner, her curiosity piqued. "Dad said you couldn't walk." "I couldn't before," Julian said proudly, puffing out his chest. "But now I'm learning again. Your dad is teaching me." "Dad's really good," Nora replied simply, her eyes sparkling with admiration. Then, she smiled and held out her hand. "Do you want to see my drawings?" The two children wandered off into the sprawling garden together, leaving the adults in the sunny, welcoming kitchen. Sabrina and Elliot, an unlikely pair, prepared lunch side by side. It was a simple, unfamiliar scene. Mrs. Lennox, who had once directed hundreds of employees with unwavering authority, now carefully and deliberately chopped vegetables, while Elliot stirred tomato sauce for pasta on the stove. "It's been a long time since I've held a kitchen knife," Sabrina said, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. "That's okay," Elliot smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I get the feeling you're good at anything you set your mind to, even cooking." "You do know how to encourage people," she replied, her voice gentler than it had ever been, her heart lighter than it had been in years. They chatted easily about work, about Nora's passion for art, about the children at St. Mary's. Suddenly, Sabrina's voice grew quiet, her eyes drifting towards the garden where the two children sat, engrossed in their artistic endeavors. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice laced with sincerity. "And thank you for bringing Nora. Julian needs a friend." "Nora needs that too," Elliot said warmly, his gaze softening. "She doesn't have many at school. The other kids don't always understand her." "Julian is the same," Sabrina sighed, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "Maybe the two of them can help each other." They fell silent, watching the children through the window. Julian was meticulously trying to copy a drawing Nora had shown him, his lines still clumsy and uncertain, while Nora coached him patiently, offering encouragement without a hint of laughter or judgment. "Nora has a special gift," Sabrina observed quietly. "She's very patient. That's because she knows what it feels like when others aren't patient with her," Elliot replied slowly, his voice tinged with understanding. "She's taught me more than I've ever taught her." Sabrina turned to look at him, truly seeing him for the first time. In that moment, with the comforting scent of tomato sauce permeating the kitchen, she saw in Elliot not only a devoted father, but a man of unwavering patience, deep-seated faith, and genuine kindness. "You're a wonderful father, Elliot," she said softly, her voice filled with admiration. "I only hope that one day I can become the kind of mother you are in your way." Elliot met her gaze, his eyes filled with gentle compassion, and rested a light hand on her shoulder. It was a simple, sincere gesture, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they were both on. "You're already doing it, Mrs. Lennox," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I see it every day." Their eyes held, conveying a quiet understanding that transcended words. Outside, the joyous laughter of two children drifted in from the garden, sounding like the soundtrack to a new beginning. A family forming not from blood or obligation, but from shared trust, unwavering courage, and unconditional love. The story of Sabrina, Julian, Elliot, and Nora is a gentle but profound reminder of the truths that truly matter in life. Never judge people by their jobs, their wealth, or their social status. True worth isn't found in titles or money, but in the depths of the heart, in the way we love, the way we trust, and the way we give. Miracles often arise from the most unexpected places, disguised as ordinary people or chance encounters. Sometimes, the person who will ultimately change your entire life is the one you once overlooked, the one you never thought to notice. It's never too late to change, to grow, to become the person you were always meant to be. Sabrina was 42 years old when she finally learned to mother with her whole heart, not just with a sense of duty. Disability does not define a person, nor does it limit their potential. Julian and Nora prove that limits reside in the mind, not in our abilities or our dreams. Love is the strongest medicine, the most potent force for healing and transformation. No amount of technology or wealth can ever replace genuine care, unwavering support, and true compassion. If this story touched your heart, remember that each of us has the potential to be someone's Elliot, the one who dares to believe, to exercise patience, and to offer hope when the world turns away. And perhaps one day we may also find ourselves on the path to becoming a Sabrina, someone who learns to look deeper, beyond the surface, and recognize the true value of every human being. Never stop believing in the transformative power of kindness. Never stop believing that people can change, that hearts can heal, and that love can conquer all. And above all, never stop loving, even when it feels the hardest. If you believe in the power of kind stories, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone you love. Because who knows? You might be the miracle in someone else's story.